Welcome to the Ranchers for Tomorrow, the Gatepost, the official podcast of the Arizona Cattle Growers Association, where the spirit of the West meets the future of ranching. Each episode opens the gate to conversations that matter most to the Arizona beef community. Rooted in over a century ranching tradition, this podcast celebrates the men and women who ride for the brand, the producers, family, and the advocates keeping Arizona cattle industry strong. Listeners will hear firsthand stories from the ranchers across the state, the challenges shaping life on the land, insights from ag policy leaders, and updates from the association that represents them. Now, here's your hosts, Nate Brawley and Sidnie Conerly.
Welcome to today's episode of the Ranchers for Tomorrow, the Gatepost podcast. We're grateful for Charlie Giron with ABS Genetics for being with us today. Before we get started, I want to make sure that we thank our sponsor, the Arizona Cattle Industry Research and Education Foundation. Without their help, we can't do this. And also want to highlight our past episodes on YouTube. If you haven't listened to those, circle back to our YouTube page, which is the Gatepost podcast, and see our other episodes. And again, excited to be here with you all. Charlie, let's go ahead and just start. Give us a kind of a brief bio on you. Give us the who, what, where, and why of Charlie.
Right. Well, thanks for having me, guys. My name is Charlie Giron. I work for ABS Genetics. We're a global company. Our U.S. office is based out of DeForest, Wisconsin, but we have offices all along the every major cattle region of the world. I've been with this company for going on almost on 10 years now. I've been in the industry for 25. As far as in the bovine genetics industry. Prior to that, I grew up in the dairy industry. My dad was in the dairy industry. My dad bred cows starting in the early 2000s. So that's kind of where jump started this career. I currently manage the Southwest region, which is pretty much south of Albuquerque down into El Paso, Texas, all of Arizona, the whole state of Nevada, and Southern California. So forgive me for being in my mobile office, but that's the reason I kind of live out of the front seat of a pickup.
Yeah. So currently you do a lot with the dairy, with the dairies in our area, right?
Yes, mostly dairy. Just because that's kind of been an everyday process. I also manage technicians that go and breed on farms. So the dairy tends to be more of an everyday aspect of what we do. Where on the beef side, we do a lot of beef, but that's, usually 1 to 2 times a year, depending on what region you're on, so yeah, our primary source of business is through the dairy farms.
I mean, tell us kind of what does your day-to-day look like? It's not necessarily in the dairy, but on the road, and what does that look like?
Right. So most of my day-to-day is ordering. I tend to kind of find out what my customers need as far as genetic wise on any kind of cattle that we're breeding. So my day-to-day would be ordering, figuring out where we need to move semen from tank to tank, or just anything that the customer might need in the AI spectrum of stuff. So we could be setting up shop protocols, cedar sinks, or for my guys on farm, I'm constantly looking at numbers, and it could be a day of just walking behind a vet, making sure we've got everything in order, to sitting in front of a computer, making sure we're changing bulls as needed. And that changes quite a bit for us, because it could be weather related, it could be a semen related, it could be a overuse of bulls. For me, on some of these bigger dairies, we could use thousands of units within a few months, and so we're constantly trying to change, so we make sure that we're providing the best genetics without like doing a lot of inbreeding and all of that takes effect, so we kind of always are managing what we're putting in the cow, how it's getting pregnant, and kind of where we're at, and so that's usually what my day to day is. And in every region for me is different, so it could be where I'm changing stuff for, like here now in Arizona, we're getting warmer, so we kind of start changing some bulls right about now, and where things might be colder, say in Nevada still, we can prolong some of that, or we're trying to change, maybe something we used last summer, and we kind of want to go into summer. So for me right now, like summer's a big hit for me going into summer, trying to figure out which direction we want to go, with heat stress and all of that other stuff.
So we kind of got an overview of ABS, but what are they doing that Arizona beef producers should know about?
Yeah, so kind of like what I've been talking about. We're really concentrating, say for here in Arizona, is how to gain conception efficiency, like through the heat, right? And then what type of bulls do we need to kind of gain that, right? We're always trying to fight like conception rate drops and stuff through the heat, cattle stress, right? And then for us here in Arizona, one of the big thing is like feed efficiency. So we're really always looking to maximize, conception and feed efficiency, especially here in Arizona, and maybe the southern part of like New Mexico and stuff, where feed, maybe rain. We've had kind of a drought this year, so we're always looking at things like that to kind of gain a better efficient animal for the next generation to come. So we're also looking at our company's always buying bulls and testing on our own. So we're really, trying to be the leaders in figuring out what the next genetic is, because we don't know, right? We don't know where that may or may not come from, but we kind of have a standard issue of kind of conception would be one. Feed is very important on the top of the list. Health traits are also huge, and those vary per region. So we're really trying to maximize those. So we're buying younger cattle. We're breeding our own stock. We're really trying to figure out, okay, how can we push the envelope in an environment, say like this, or even say, back east where they're still under snow, right? Or in Texas where you have, and not the same bull fits every region, right? You just can't be like, hey, and this is where we're coming to, is we're not trying to figure out like what the best bull is out in the United States, although that's great, but we're also trying to figure out kind of like, hey, what fits different regions? What's the best bull for this environment and this situation? It's not necessarily just having the best bull on the market, but what fits different areas, right? Where it could be, a drought in Texas to our drought here in Arizona, or it could be something where Wisconsin, where they're constantly under some snow or whatever. So we're really trying to maximize kind of our semen and where it needs to go in our bull power, and figure out and have enough of them. So we've taken the leaps of buying bulls at a younger age, starting to collect them, make sure they have, they're more have a longevity in their life as far as a production bull. So we're starting to collect bulls, say like 10 months old, and figuring them out sooner, and Xing out something that's not going to work, right? So versus just having a random assortment of bulls, there's a science behind it, and I'm probably not the guy to talk 100% about it, but that's kind of where we're at, right? We're really doing that, and then what fits, shot protocols, and then with sex semen coming on board, right? Which bulls are the best candidate for that? Because not all bulls collect and sex good, right? So we're really trying to figure out which ones are are doing that. We do that on the beef and dairy side. We're on the dairy side. They want more females. Beef side, we're looking for more males. So, it's a constant battle of what bulls we're going to have up on our lineup. We change those primarily all the time, but like twice a year we have good, they do a revamp on numbers, and we always trying to stay ahead of the curve on that.
So being in the semen business, the selling of semen, how do you have that conversation with producers who may call you and say, hey, I want straws from Bodacious, but that specific bull won't work in Southern Nevada or Northern Arizona or whatever it may be. How do you have that conversation with them, even though you're in the business of selling semen?
Well, that conversation, it goes different ways. But again, I wouldn't buy a Cadillac if I or a Mercedes and try to use it as a farm rig, right? And that's usually how I start that. You want what fits your needs. It's that conversation is not as hard because we normally have data that backs it up, right? And usually, I try to have a wide variety of bulls in my back pocket that I know that are going to fit this region, and so and that are producing numbers that these guys are looking for, right? Or maybe above. And that's kind of how that conversation really starts for me, right? Is you got to pick the right equipment. I wouldn't pick a lawnmower tractor to go disc up a section of ground. So and that's kind of the same thing. And sometimes you get what you pay for, but sometimes when you just need a lawnmower, you don't go buy a big old John Deere either, right? You can the conversation's harder to get people not to overpay it, right? Like, you don't need this. We need to be here, right? And that's the hardest conversation versus kind of like, hey, I'd rather take a guy that's on the bottom and kind of bring him up because it's easier versus somebody that's on top and he thinks he just needs to elevate that even higher, but he wants the best, right? So it's a catch-22, but on the other side, it's not a really hard conversation. And data helps us with that, right? Like we really try to, not everybody's using the same bulls here, but have a wide, that's why we study what bulls work in certain areas, right? Or what I'm having success with. Or one of my other colleagues is having success with. So we kind of share data amongst each other, but also, we breed so many places that it's easy to have the data.
I think that's interesting, and I guess I never put it together that ABS, is probably looking at, for sure the country, but probably the world from a 30,000-foot view of what works. Even from within Arizona, Sydney's more north than me, and bulls that are at her elevation versus mine may be completely different. So I'm big on in any kind of a successful business or successful team has got a lot of key variables. And so I think having someone like you that has the knowledge from the genetic side to have that conversation of, hey, here's where I want to go, here's where I want to be, and here's where I'm at. How do I get there? And that's very interesting.
Right. And with that, and that's the conversation where we're trying to have with, say, the beef industry nowadays is, I think people have a run of a really good bull and they're trying to buy sons, or grandsons of this bull. And that's where AI really takes effect, is not only can you have that, but you can have a multitude of different ones of those, right? And sometimes just buying the best doesn't mean it fits your criteria of where you're at, right? And yeah, I've been places just in an hour difference, is a changing factor. I would say we're 65 miles from what bull you really need to have, right? Because it could, around here, could change that 65 miles. You could be in the heart of the desert with really no nutrients, and then you go up north and you got a plethora of feed that you may, and those bulls may or may not work there. And that's kind of where the conversation of The dairy industry kind of changed it with, we're not going to have so many bulls, and I have access to all of the bulls, right? I don't need just access to this. And so, the beef industry's going that direction. And that's kind of what we're trying to push is here's a book, here's a catalog of thousands of bulls, but let's find the ones that work for you, because you might be buying some from the sale barn, right, that aren't necessarily fitting your criteria. And that's the conversation that I have with a lot of guys is, what's your criteria? And that really helps me pick out bulls, right? Like, where are you trying to be? What are your goals? And how are we going to accomplish those? Whether it's, hey, I spent too much money on feed last year, we need to cut that down. My cows are too big. The calves are too big. All of that plays a factor in it, right?
So I do have a question. You're not just, you have access to all breeds of bulls, not just like beef or dairy. Like, so you can get bulls from Africa and bring them over, or just in the United States?
So we have access to a lot of different bulls. Depending on region, there's some that don't, like, say, like Wagyu is a good, we can no longer get Chinese Wagyu. So they're coming, either they're American bred Wagyus, or they're coming from Australia, is where those are. So there's some breeds that we can, and there's some that we, technically can't, because I don't know if they do well here, or the semen's not viable enough to make the trip, right? So that all plays a factor too. We ship semen all over the world, but at some point, semen, it takes too long to ship it. So the viability of it's not going to be great, so we just don't do it. Like Brazil, we can do some Brazilian cattle. They can come down from Brazil. Most of that is in an embryo, and because they do a lot of embryos there in Brazil, so like things like that, they're more apt to stay alive longer, so we can just ship them. But yeah, we have access to just most breeds, anything that you can breed here in the United States. Besides, I get asked, besides bucking bulls, and we don't do Corrientes, and we don't do minis, right? So anything else, we're pretty good with.
You got some Highlanders?
No, things of that nature. I mean, I don't have access to them, but I don't know if we have them in the catalog. They might have one or two. I just never ordered them, so I kind of stay away from that kind of stuff. But no mini Brahmas, things like that. But anything that's in the commercial side of semen, we have access to. Yes.
Yeah.
So kind of playing off of that, how does the U.S. rank compared to some of the other countries? You talked about Brazil being big in the embryos. How do we rank as far as in the genetic usage and technology? How do we rank?
Oh, I don't know. It's so like I wouldn't know the ranking on that. I would say we're great in certain things, like producing number wise of cattle, right? Like we're more in the technology side of things. On certain things, the computers and facilities for sure. In Brazil, I know for a fact that they use a lot of embryos. Here, we're not, and our embryo usage is not great in the United States. I mean, we do some, and some will argue that, like, oh, I do embryos all the time, but in a whole across the United States, they're just kind of expensive here, and so we don't mass produce a bunch of embryos. They are used, yes, but I think in Brazil, they've kind of mastered it. They use it, and I think it's because of their region. It's the best way to get a conception rate number, so they use them more than we do. But and then you kind of go to China or whatever, and I believe that those guys are they're really into the technology, but they don't produce the numbers. So it's kind of a wide spectrum of things, and it's more region. But I would say we're great at a lot of things, and we're kind of behind the eight ball on some things, if that makes sense. But
Absolutely.
without pinpointing what's a certain area, you know. But yeah, but we're really good at making numbers.
That kind of rolls into my next question. Uh, from your position and ABS as a business, what do you wish beef producers and ranchers in Arizona understood a little better about beef genetics?
I think in a whole they have a grasp on genetics, right? We wouldn't be where we are. I just wish they would utilize them better. I if and I don't want to. I'm not throwing a stone or nothing, but I wish they, like the dairy industry, we figured out there how to use them faster, more efficient, better. Where we're breeding every day, we're creating numbers every day. The numbers are easier to track because we can track them. I mean, daily, weekly, monthly. You know, every not every 90 days, every 120 days. Like, we're always looking at data on the dairy side. We're on the beef side, it's kind of, I would say we're 50 years behind, that with, and I know they're pushing, they have, a lot of guys have data, but I think they concentrate on a few other aspects over you know today's hard numbers versus kind of say the dairy industry, and that's where they differ. But I think they could use their genetics better if we could breed them more often and see numbers and be able to get that data back versus you know picking a bull this year and saying, well, in spring we'll breed them again and see where they fall, or or in fall we'll breed them. I just wish we were kind of utilizing that better. And some people might be like, no, I have better data, or they have better data, but amongst a whole, and I'm not picking out one region or one rancher over another, but amongst a whole, it's usually guys who order this bull, they breed them, and then we kind of figure out, when they calve, how they produce, versus kind of an everyday thing, and I wish we would do that a little bit, more, and kind of get into that aspect of it.
What about the producer that might be listening to this that's not currently utilizing, ABS or artificial insemination into their operation, whether it be for environment or logistics? What do you have to say to those type of folks as far as, again, going back to what being in the industry for so long and heavy on the genetic side? What would be a conversation starter for those folks to maybe look at artificial insemination a little bit more?
Right. Well, one is, cattle are expensive. And today is no different than yesterday, and it's not going to be no different than it will be tomorrow. And so I think having 6 or 7 herd bulls, that's a lot of semen that you could buy from a lot of different aspects, and you could change a lot of things genetically, next year versus 3 years from now, right? Typically what I see, a couple of the smaller ranchers or whatever, they buy a couple bulls and they try them out, and then one doesn't make it, you kind of go back to the drawing board, pick out another bull. I don't think we're elevating genetics fast enough in the beef industry. And I'm not saying that there aren't those people out there doing it. I'm just saying I see more that are not, right? And where we kind of buy a bull this year, and then next year the next hot bull comes out and everybody's trying to buy that bull, and we spend more time finding out what bulls worked in the past versus what bulls were going to work towards the future, if that makes any sense. And for us, we're always thinking of what's the next 6 months is, where we're going to be at next year, 2 years from now, right? What's the next crop going to be? And I know that other guys are doing it, but we're doing it with bull breeding versus AI, where we could change that. We like, hey, we didn't like how these calves came out. X amount, go get another one, versus then, we got to go buy another bull. We got to find out what we're going to pick. And I think in the beef industry, that's where some people are kind of, not utilizing AI enough is kind of a thing. And I wish we would do that more. And it would change the process of breeding cattle, sooner, faster, better. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, right? And that's what we're here for. And so that would be my goal, is how to breed cows better, faster, and more efficient. And I do believe that we don't utilize the genetics that are at hand. I mean, there's hundreds of bulls and several different companies. I'm not just saying ABS across the world. I'm just saying you could go to any company that sells bull genetics and is in an AI stuff, and have access to hundreds of bulls, versus, the 10 that are sitting in your backyard. And I think you're missing out a big aspect when you could just kind of be like, hey, I have access to all of this. And maybe people don't know. I don't know. But that's a good reason why I like having these conversations, because I want people to kind of figure out, hey, look, we're here, and people have access to this if you just go down that avenue. And I guess I'm just trying to change a 100-year-old mind that, this is kind of the future of bull genetics, or even cattle ranching in a whole.
Yeah. So, I think, I guess the term would be genetic turnaround,
Yes.
quicker genetic turnaround. And for those that may not have been to like an ABS website or a semen website, again, to really kind of grasp what he's talking about, go look at the ABS website, right? Where you can go on and just, you can click whether it's a dairy breed or a beef breed. You can go in and select the actual breed, whether it be Angus or Charolais or Hereford or whatever, and see, again, hundreds of different bulls on the website. So again, I would challenge all those that are listening today, just go look at the website. Again, whether you buy semen or artificially inseminate, just go check out the website to kind of see just where ABS is at in the genetic turnaround. And I also put a plug in at this point for a podcast episode coming up where we talk about a meeting that ABS was just at, where they talk about the next 6 months and the next 6 years, and what does that calf look like. Again, so it's going to be a kind of a cool conversation with Charlie and some of the higher ups at ABS.
Charlie, how are the Arizona beef producers leaving money on the table when it comes to genetics?
Well, I think not elevating the genetics soon enough, we kind of leave things on the table. And like I said, or picking bulls because, we have 10 or 15 bulls, or not being able to afford bulls, just not breeding AI. I think you're leaving money on the table. Not having access to genetics that increase, feed efficiency, calving rate, health traits, all of that is leaving money on the table. I think, and I'm not saying that there's bad bulls out there, but just, where you're limiting yourself to, the bulls that you have for breeding on your ranch or on your facility is that's kind of the start of leaving money on the table and not grasping, kind of where we, what you could be sooner, and when we talk about beef, we're not just talking about like, hey, show quality stuff. Us as ABS, and without kind of getting too much into this, but we start and we go to the packer and we go to the feed yards and we understand what you're going to be selling. And so we try to find genetics and maximize everything else and build our own genetics by breeding our own type of cattle and finding things that it fits all aspects, and just not like, hey, well, that bull had good conception, right? We're not locking. What we try not to do is just lock a producer down to, a good calving rate, right? And not having a good, feed efficiency, or hey, we're gonna concentrate on low birth weight. So we picked, these 3 bulls here, but they don't marble out as good, right? So we try to maximize everything, and yeah, some bulls are better than others at certain things. I 100% agree with that. So, but our genetics are based off of kind of like, hey, this is what the packer wants, this is what the feed yard wants, so we're going to produce these kind of bulls, and then on top of that, we're going to have some that elevate, low birth weight, a calving rate, feed efficiency, right? So you get some that maybe are great marblers, but maybe we can do something different, and they're better at feed, or they're not as good at calving rate, but maybe you have some bigger cows. We can play with that, and that's the beauty of an AI company, and an AI in a whole, is there's so many moving parts that we could kind of fit either one of those, right? We can kind of get into this, but I think we're leaving money on the table in a whole is just not utilizing it all, right? We don't get, you're not taking advantage of, not only do I have a great bull and a great cow, but I can also maximize this as well, or limit this, right? Maybe you've had other issues. Maybe we could change things, and we can change them faster, right? I don't know what it takes to change on it's your everyday average ranch. So if you've got a bull that created a bunch of straight-legged cows, or calves, and you're putting these on the ground, and maybe whatever, then it's, you have to sell the bull, buy a new one, kind of figure that part out, where we could see it and change it immediately, right? And be like, well, we're not using that genetic no more, or now we've got to use a genetic to fix that,
Right.
and I think that's kind of where, some producers leave a lot of money on the table, is they don't take advantage of it.
That's a good point. For those listening, what are kind of like some statistics? So like if ABS went to a ranch, they had 20 open cows. Yeah, you AI 20 cows. Do you have a statistic to that? Or, just other examples?
No, I mean, if you have 20 cows, we want to get every cow pregnant, right? But in there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of moving parts into that. But that's where we can help. If we walk onto a facility and they have 20 or 30, 50 head that we want to breed, we're like, okay, this is what needs to change, because we want 100%, right? That we want 100% conception, and that's what we're going to shoot for. So, we could be like, hey, this needs a change. We can look at nutrition. We look at, what we need to breed to, whether, okay, well, we need this type of bull would work best. I don't really have any numbers off the top of my head, but that's, if you have 20, we're trying to get 20 pregnant, and we can help with shop protocols, sync programs, any of that aspect. So you're not just calling somebody to pick bulls, like you're also calling somebody that wants to get your cows pregnant, right? And that's what we're really trying to do. If you have 100 in front of us, we're trying to get 100 of them.
Yeah.
And we do have people that do this every day. So that's the other aspect, where maybe somebody doesn't understand it, and they don't see the AI process every day, but we do, right? Across the board, we've if it's out there, we've seen it, we've done it, we've dealt with it, right? And so that's where it's an advantage there. So we can kind of figure out how to fix it with you, and go, okay, this is the route we need to go, right? We try not to shoot in the dark. when it comes to
Yeah.
this.
Well, and I think, that kind of going back to our previous question about leaving money on the table, talking about, a specific group of cows or whatever, I would challenge guys to think about the value of getting those cows that statistically are late breeders. They're breeding in the last 30 days of the 90-day window. If you could get those to come back and breed with the rest of the group in the first 30 days, that's significant money in today's beef market. If you could get, the bottom 20% that are breeding late to catch up with the higher producing cows, again, that's a significant income. So there's lots of ways to play with the genetics when it comes to AI.
Yeah, and that you're right. Most people think that, hey, genetic, we're going to pick a few bulls, right? No, we kind of go beyond that. And you're right. We kind of don't, days on feed is expensive, right? So we try to minimize that. And I don't think people think of that aspect when it comes to genetics. They just think we're going to pick bulls, but no, we've really tried to concentrate on, hey, are we, how many days on feed are your cattle on? Whether it's your open cows at home or your steers that you shipped or retained ownership going to the feed yard, right? So all of that is money, and we've thought about that. We see it. We talk to the people, and so that is one point there that we try to maximize on.
I was wondering if you had any words of wisdom for the more open ranger ranches, the large land ranches that don't see their cows every day, the ones that have more, 500 head of cows, but 100 head of bulls, the ones that don't need to rotate pastures, who breed all year long, like those kinds of ranchers.
Right. I think that some of those guys, I see those guys all the time. I have conversations with them. Those are the typical ranchers that they've kind of got that figured out, and so they understand that they're only going to fix one issue at a time versus, hey, we're going to bring in all the cattle twice a year. We're going to breed them. We're going to do whatever. I would say to those guys, the biggest thing for them would be, health traits, I think, are number one thing that they don't really look at, feet and legs, because, those cows are always traveling. And they just pick a bull and then we breed them. And then they end up with some that are lame or whatnot. So I think, picking bulls that have good feet, leg, and health traits, because they are out. And then you need something that is also going to be hardy enough to kind of take that kind of abuse. But I don't. There's far less of those guys that I see versus most of the guys that are trying to, because those guys aren't breeding. They've kind of got it figured out for what they need, right? And they're picking bulls, and they're not trying to get everything done in a certain timeline, right? Most of my knowledge on kind of range cattle are guys that have short calving windows, and we're trying to get things. So we do a lot of shoot breeding. We do a lot of stuff like that. And so that's been my most of my knowledge in that kind of stuff.
And I would, again, kind of going back to my previous statement of, again, AI may not be 100% for everybody, but I would challenge them to, there may be specific components of an operation where artificial insemination could drastically improve things. For instance, not having to buy a heifer bull. If you're keeping replacements and you're spending $10,000 on a heifer bull and he's only breeding, 5% of your cow herd, that to me, that's where AI could come in and can come in handy. Again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but again, I would challenge guys to look into some of those other scenarios where it could be implemented.
Right. And nowadays we're finding that because you're going to find less and less bulls, in my opinion. And this is just my opinion, but I mean, guys aren't going to hold back and try to sell a bull because now they got to feed them and they're worth so much money, right? That they just have one more steer and it goes off to make money. So we may find ourselves in a position where we have less bulls to choose from, and that might be, and so I'm trying to open up conversations. This is why I'm trying to have conversations with everybody that AI may not be your thing, but it might be in your future in some way, right? And keep an open mind to that maybe today you don't have a need for it or you don't see how you can implement that, but in the future we may need to implement that in some way, whether it's on a small scale, like Nate said, on heifers, or just on a few outlier cows that aren't getting out there or can't make the travel, or are, you are bringing them from the North 40 that can't be out there anymore, and you want to keep them close to home, but you can't replace them because it gets expensive. So, and she might be a good cow. Those might be some of the things that we, where you start implementing, hey, we'll just AI, 10, 12 head this year versus, kicking them out and seeing if they'll, make it back or whatnot. So every dollar counts, and every animal, equals $1. So we don't want to lose them. It isn't like, well, we lost a few this year with the price of cattle and this year, last year, and the years to come. You want to maximize every head that you have. And if they can have babies, that's even better. And that's kind of our mindset right now is, how do we get every cow pregnant?
I think that's the goal. Every cow have a calf every year. So.
Right.
All righty. Well, we are kind of up on that perfect time limit. Again, want to give another shout out to the Arizona Cattle Industry Research and Education Foundation for making things happen, and a huge expression of gratitude for Charlie. Again, he's on the road and in his pickup, but he took time to sit down and visit with us. So we really appreciate it. And there's a good possibility that we will see more of Charlie in future episodes.
Awesome.
So, with that, sure appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
See ya.